Hi, I'm Krejci. I'm a vet, and in Ceva I'm responsible for the veterinary services dedicated to swine vaccines. Within the scope of this symposium, I'm going to talk about the role of swine vaccines in the health control, and especially how vaccines can really help to the vets to reduce the dependence on antibiotics.
Today, in all those presentations, we heard and we discussed the need to reduce the use of antibiotics. That's the clear demand from the public, from the academics, from the authorities. So now, in those following 40 minutes, we will walk through some thoughts about whether we can reduce the reliance on antibiotics using the vaccines, because anyhow, we've been relying as swine veterinarians and swine producers on antibiotics and maintaining the health of swine, and we still do that. So are vaccines some potential alternative that will reduce this reliance on antibiotics? And of course, we all feel that logically it is true, but I will share with you some evidence that that vaccines really can represent the alternative, still maintaining the good health, good performance, and good well-being of pigs. So why do we need the alternative? We all know that the ultimate The purpose of the veterinarians is to take care about health. This is what we are educated for. This is what we are paid for. And not only health, we have to take care about the performance, strongly, obviously related to good health. And more and more, and we've heard that since this morning, well-being, welfare, is important element in this swine production, not only for us who are, or you, who are in the direct contact with pigs, but it is perceived as an important element for the pork consumers. So if we talk about the antibiotics or vaccines, of course, we focus on infectious diseases. And we can see here just a very short list for what purposes antibiotics are used, and if and when eventually they can be complementary, combined or replaced by the vaccines. So certainly for the treatment of bacterial agents, bacterial infections, antibiotics remain the only tool to really deal with the sick animals, clinically ill animals. So for the treatment, so far, there is no alternative. However, for the control, for which already either antibiotics or vaccines or together are used, and here the vaccines can start to play the more predominant role. Certainly for the prevention, and that's also the mode of use which is being controlled even by the authorities, by the regulations. The use of antibiotics is being and will be more and more reduced, if not prohibited, depending on the countries, on the regions. And then vaccines will certainly take over the major role in the prevention. And then finally, for the eradication, again, and we have many good examples of the successful eradication of the viral diseases by using the vaccines, or maybe a little less easy and less efficient, yet still possible eradication of bacterial diseases using both antibiotics or vaccines. So also for these purposes, the role of the vaccine will become more important. So we've been talking a lot about the the aim, which is the reduction of the use of antibiotics, because we need to reduce, or at least to stop, the increase of the development of the resistance. Now, Nicholas already mentioned the 3R concept that Ceva takes as the guidelines how to take care about the antibiotics. And he mentioned already that my role now will be in focusing on the replacement, together with the reduction of the use of antibiotics with the vaccine. So, in general, what are the alternatives to antibiotics? We talked about the use of antibiotics for the treatment of the bacterial diseases. Here, besides, of course, the use of antiphlogistic, paracetamol as the first approach to control, to reduce the clinical signs. But if you want to be like more pathogen specific, there is so far no alternative. Maybe in the future, and there are some, and you may know, there are some projects or research ongoing, both in the human medicine and veterinary medicine, potentially the use of bacteriophages might be the solution. Certainly, there is the space, maybe not to completely replace the antibiotics, but to improve the efficacy. And here we come to the innovation, and this is one of the fields of Ceva that we will do the research and development in the efforts to improve the efficacy while maintaining or reducing the risk of the resistance by adding or combining the different components, which will potentially improve the efficacy. Pharmacokinetics, distribution, targeting specifically different organs in the body, etc. So that will be the field, I would say, more easy and feasible in the coming years, how to save the role of antibiotics and prevent the development of the resistance. If we will speak about the prevention, then we have a larger pool of tools how to reduce the use of antibiotics for the prevention. And the previous speakers and Jean-Noel talked a lot about the management factors. And here I'm really thinking about the large scope of whatever management is. Managing pigs, and as Nico mentioned, synchronizing the batches, the synchronization, the flow of the animals. Here I mean also the environment, technologies, feeding strategies, etc. Breeding. We know that there are some breeds of pigs more susceptible to some pathogens. That's the case of PCV2. That's the case of Mycoplasma. There were identified the genetic lines which are more susceptible to MHIO. There were some identified genes responsible for the susceptibility to PRRS. So certainly in the future, that will be also this way feasible to reduce the susceptibility of swine to certain pathogens, if not even finally at the final stage, the resistance. And then definitely vaccines play and will play an important role in the prevention. Of course, this is no breakthrough now. Immunization is the phenomenon known for 1,000 years, right? The first immunization was started to be performed 1,000 years ago in China against the smallpox virus. The first laboratory vaccine is 100, 40 years ago old. So here, I'm not talking about anything new, but this is the field that should be explored more. Vaccines should be utilized more. And this is also for Ceva, the field where we are working on and we will bring more innovations. The fact that vaccines should be utilized more is not only our idea or your wish, it is the fact which is recognized by the authorities and which was stated by, by the last report of antimicrobial resistance published last year, saying that, and really identifying vaccines as the potential tool to combat drug resistance. And it was clearly said that the available vaccines should be administered more widely to help to reduce the use of antibiotics, and also the research and the development of the new vaccines should be supported. And it is already supported by several projects which are trying to combine even the public resources with the private resources. There are many projects sponsored by or co-financed by the European Union, and Ceva is proud, and I'm personally proud, that Ceva is participating on those research projects which will really bring, and I certainly truly believe that they will bring very strong innovation and breakthrough in the prevention control of some pathogens which are not controlled yet by the vaccine. Vaccines can certainly help to reduce the use of antibiotics in two ways. If we speak about the bacterial pathogens, it can up to replace or reduce the use of antibiotics which are used for those bacterial pathogens. Antibiotics which are used for the prophylactic purposes, those can be up to replaced. In terms of viral infections, it was already identified and also mentioned in those antimicrobial reports that a lot of antibiotics is used unnecessarily in the course of the viral infections, just as a backup for the control of potential secondary bacterial infections, or just because of the misdiagnosing those infections. So certainly for the prevention of the viral diseases, vaccines is the #1 option instead of using antibiotics. The fact that the overuse or the overall use of antibiotics was in the past really too high, and the fact that the reduction of this overuse of antibiotics doesn't need to harm the productivity and the profitability of the swine business has been demonstrated in certain countries, and we have very good examples. One of those is Denmark. You may know that Denmark was, and really probably the first country, where through the regulations, agreements among the swine producers, veterinary community, and the government organizations, they achieved really significant reduction of the total use of antibiotics, and you see that in the years between 1995 to 2008, they reduced the overall use of antibiotics by more than 50%. Still, keeping the swine business, swine industry in Denmark highly profitable, and Denmark is now one of the biggest exporters of not only the genetics, but also of piglets or fed on the pigs. Another example, which was already mentioned this morning, is Netherlands. Netherlands had the project from 2009 to 2015, and in this period, the overall use of antibiotics achieved more than 50%, and now, as it was mentioned, this year will be the year where the new baselines will be set and the new projects for the further reduction will be proposed by the authorities. Again, with no loss of profitability. What we have also seen in Netherlands was that certainly after the reduction of the use of some antimicrobials, the appearance of some diseases became more frequent. So we have seen the increased usage of the vaccines to control those diseases. So it was really clearly seen that the reduction of the total amount of antibiotics resulted in the bigger, higher need and the higher use of the vaccines. So let me now just share with you some examples from the published resources of certain diseases which were or can be successfully controlled or even more successfully controlled by vaccines in comparison to antibiotics. First good example is proliferative colitis due to Lawsonia. And here on the chart, you see the comparison between the pigs' batches or the use of antibiotics with no vaccine used in those blue bars, and antibiotics, oral or injectable, used when the colitis vaccine was implemented. So you see that for both oral and injectable antibiotics, you see the drop of the use of antibiotics when colitis vaccine was administered. That was the example in Denmark. Another very good example to demonstrate the efficiency of the vaccines is obviously PCV2. Those are the results of the nice study performed quite recently in Spain, and this paper was published at APVS 2011. That was the trial on the farrow to finish 1200 sow farm in Spain. And you see all the performance data. I will not go through all of them, and I will really finish, and I encourage you to focus on the last line where the consumption, the medication cost, consumption of antibiotics particularly, so the total medication cost was highly significantly reduced in really, on average, of the more than 20 batches of pigs vaccinated in comparison to the previously more than 20 batches not vaccinated pigs. And the difference was 2 euros, almost 3 euros per pig. Porcine pleuropneumonia, we have, and in Southeast Asia, I think that many of you are familiar with the vaccine against pleuropneumonia, Coglopix, and we have conducted several studies, some of them published. So this is one of those when Coglopix was used in one group in comparison to the group where the specific medication against pleuropneumonia was implemented, and you see that it was quite heavy medication with tilmicozin 2 times for the 3 weeks period. And in the third group, there was just the standard medication, but with not this specific anti-actinobacillus medication. And again, if you can see the results of the performance, you see that pigs with no specific medication program, but vaccinated with Coglopix, achieved better performance in terms of both weight gain or feed efficiency in comparison to really, again, quite heavy tilmicozin treatment. Another trial, very recent, and that will be published now at ESPHN this year, trial conducted in Austria, where Coglapix vaccinated pigs were compared to the group where the combination of amoxicillin oral and injectable was used to control pleuropneumonia, or the group where only injectable antibiotics were used for the treatment, and the final total use of antibiotics expressed as the therapeutical index was compared among those three groups. And you see that Coglapix vaccinated pigs had highly significantly lowest therapeutical index. That means the use of antibiotics for the control of the disease. And actually, in this case, there was no single animal that required the antibiotic treatment. And those antibiotics which were used according to the management of the farm were used for the treatment of the lameness. Anyhow, the results specific results monitoring the prevention of pleuropneumonia expressed by the API index were the lowest in the Coglapix group. So here we see that the prevention of the lung lesions due to Actinobacillus was significantly higher in the Coglapix vaccinated pigs in comparison to the antibiotics. Another example is MHIO, and here I would really like to stay a while. MHIO is not only the pathogen responsible for enzootic pneumonia, but MHIO, and we have, and I will show you some recent published information about the role of MHIO in really supporting the other co-infections and the control, efficient control of MHIO really can help to prevent or control also the other infections. One of this is Actinobacillus, and that was the study made in France a couple of years ago, and this is just briefly showing that the previous infection with MHIO, subsequently those pigs were infected by Actinobacillus in comparison to the pigs which were initially infected by Actinobacillus and then MHIO, or in comparison to pigs which were simultaneously infected with Actinobacillus and MHIO. So those pigs which were infected first with Mycoplasma had the lowest weight gain, the highest rate of the pleuritis, and the highest mortality. So definitely MHIO really increased the severity of pleuropneumonia due to Actinobacillus. Another infection, PIRS. Last year, a very nice study was published, a review was published by Dr. Krejci showing and concluding that Mycoplasma can deteriorate the course of PIRS infection, and Mycoplasma vaccination can improve even the prevention of PIRS based on the PIRS-specific vaccination protocol. Again, very recent study published last year demonstrated that Mycoplasma can enhance the replication of PCV. And that was very surprising. And even more surprising was that different MHIO strain can differently increase this replication of PCV. So we know that there is the heterogeneity of Mycoplasma strains circulating in the field. We know that there are differences in the pathogenicity, in the virulence of Mycoplasma themselves. But very surprisingly, also there is a difference between different Mycoplasma strains in this ability to enhance PCV2 replication and consequently PCV infection. So this is just to kind of reinforce the attention that we should pay to MHIO and to the prevention of MHIO. And this is just, again, demonstrating, and that was the very well-known publication of Professor Maas a couple of years ago, already showing that based on the survey made in Belgium on 14 swine herds in Belgium, vaccinated pigs in comparison to non-vaccinated pigs had really lower consumption of drugs, and the medication cost per pig the difference was 50 cents per pig. So again, vaccination against Mycoplasma is cost beneficial, and it can really lead to the reduction of the overall medication cost. Now we have the data from the trial conducted with Hyogen, and that was a very nice study performed in France. And today already we discussed the importance to keep the high health state of pigs. And so we conducted this study on the classified high health status nucleus farm in France, which, however, reported some respiratory distress. This farm was not using any Mycoplasma vaccine, however, it was confirmed as MHIO positive. And so there were pigs vaccinated with Hyogen, and we made the comparison with pigs which were not vaccinated. And you see that the prevention of MHIO resulted in the significant decrease of the lung lesion scores in terms of the percentage of affected pigs and also the extension of the lesions in the lungs. Prevention of MHIO, and I really repeat, that was the declared classified high health status farm. So the prevention with Hyogen resulted in the almost more than 30 grams more in the weight gain. And when we made the calculation of the cost-profit ratio using the repronomics, we finally came to the result that almost 1,500 euros net profit was brought by Hyogen per each 1,000 pigs. So this improvement was achieved with no additional need for the antimicrobials. So if I would just summarize the expected or confirmed or proved benefits of the vaccination. Vaccination can really reduce the number of breaks due to bacterial or viral diseases. It can reduce the need of the use of antibiotics if the viral diseases are controlled well. So it can reduce this use of antibiotics, which is either misused because of the false diagnosis, or which is needed for the control of the potential secondary bacteria. And now, the conclusion I mentioned before, the antimicrobial report. And so, based on all those concepts, all this knowledge, all those evidence, also in this report, it was concluded that, number one, the use of existing vaccines should be really extended, and the existing vaccines should be used more widely and effectively. It was also mentioned, and it was discussed also previously, and it's obvious that the more efficient use of the vaccine is strongly dependent on the precise diagnosis. So also in this report, it was really focused on the use and improvement of diagnostics. And this is also one of the fields that Ceva is going to bring the innovation, and diagnostics is certainly the field that we will focus on in the research. We have to use the efficient vaccines and efficient vaccination strategies. How to recognize efficient vaccines. So we need to have the monitoring methods, how to define the good vaccination strategy. Backwards, we have to do the right diagnostics, and we, again, need to have the monitoring methods. And here, Ceva also brings the tools how to score the impact of some of the infections and how to calculate the benefits of different approaches in the control or prevention of those diseases. Diagnostic methods and better diagnostics can really avoid the misuse of antibiotics. It can reduce the misuse of antibiotics who are not necessary, as I mentioned before, for example, in the case of the viral diseases. And those new diagnostics which are important to be developed or implemented will need to focus on time. So that's why the further research, we believe, will go into the development of the on-spot used diagnostic tools that will identify the pathogens, maybe even including the antibiosusceptibility, multiplex PCRs, maybe the really point-of-care PCRs that will be able to identify the range of the pathogens and prioritize the pathogens which are predominant in the different disease cases. Maybe also we will move from the more taxonomic classification into more pathotyping, really that will allow us to identify the most important agents in terms of virulence and importance in the disease. A very interesting statement was mentioned also in this AMR report, was that actually the reduction of the antibiotics and the replacement or contribution of the vaccines to the reduction of antibiotics will come naturally. When we, 2 years ago, when we discussed with our colleagues from laboratory in Jaffa, they told us, we are now facing, with no restrictions, no administrative restrictions of antibiotics, we are facing problems in our overuse of antibiotics because we have some pathogens which are so multi-resistant that we are lacking the antibiotics to control the diseases in swine. So naturally, without any consequences and just really looking out of the context that we were talking about this morning in terms of the resistance and the transmission to resistance to the human population, just by the fact that we need to preserve the antibiotics for the control, treatment of the infectious diseases in swine, naturally that will lead to the preservation of the antibiotics to be used only when necessary, and the overall use will decrease. So let me just wrap up by a few conclusions. It has been demonstrated, and we've seen some examples, that efficient vaccines can really reduce the dependence on antibiotics. They can be, in certain cases, even more efficient than heavy antibiotic medication. Vaccines can improve health and maintain or even improve the performance. Thus, they can lead to the higher profits. And we need the efficient vaccines, and we need certainly to have good diagnostic tools for the setting up the proper diagnostic and for the proposing the most efficient vaccination strategies and for monitoring the results of the use of those vaccines. And here I would like to thank you very much for your attention, and if there will be any questions, I'd be happy to answer.